name is Christopher Richmond. I'm the Assistant Director for the Academy for Teaching and Learning here at Baylor. And the ATL has the pleasure of partnering with several Baylor campus units in sponsoring today's presentation. The Teaching, Learning, and Technology Committee, the Baylor Interdisciplinary Corps, the Department of Philosophy, University Libraries, and the Office of Vice Provost for Research. And I thank each of these units for their coordination and support for today's event. Our guest today is Dr. Chris Long, Professor of Philosophy and Dean of the College of Arts and Letters at Michigan State University. Dr. Long is a consummate scholar, academic administrator, and public intellectual. His research in ancient Greek philosophy has produced 3 books, and he deals in modern philosophy with his forthcoming book, Reiner Schurman and the Poetics of Politics. He has also published dozens of articles and book chapters. Prior to coming to Michigan State in 2015, Dr. Long held faculty appointments at Richard Stockton College of New Jersey and the Pennsylvania State University. At Penn State, Dr. Long also served as Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies, then as Associate Dean for Graduate and Undergraduate Education in the College of Liberal Arts. And currently, as Dean of the College of Arts and Letters at Michigan State, Dr. Long oversees the recruitment and development of outstanding students, faculty, and staff. As a public scholar, Dr. Long co-founded the Public Philosophy Journal, an open access, open peer-reviewed publication developed with nearly $1 million in grants from the Mellon Foundation. He is also co-principal investigator on the Humane Metrics for the Humanities and Social Sciences Project, which enables scholars to tell more textured stories about their research and teaching. And on top of that, all of that, Dr. Long maintains a blog, cplong.org, in which he shares his thoughts on academic administration, public scholarship, and digital scholarly communication. And he hosts the Digital Dialogue podcast, where he cultivates the excellence of dialogue in the digital age. And it is for his wisdom and insights on digital scholarship and its communities that we have asked Dr. Long to speak with us today. And as he comes to speak with us about the meaning and value of digital scholarly communities, please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Long.
Thanks, Christopher. It is really a pleasure to be back here at Baylor. I'm really grateful to have an opportunity to talk to you this morning about using digital modes of communication and engagement to cultivate communities around your work and around the scholarship that we're doing. But I want to say a few things at the beginning about, and actually I will start with my first picture, this is a picture of, at Michigan State, we have a rock that gets painted. It's a student thing. It gets painted it's been painted for years and years. There's layers of paint in the rock. And as Christopher mentioned, before I came to Michigan State, I was at Penn State. And here I am at Baylor. And we're going through a very difficult period at Michigan State right now. And we are working very hard to figure out how to be different in the wake of the transformative and heartbreaking survivor impact statements that many of you may have heard, but certainly were heartbreaking for us in January, as we learned about the impact our failure to protect our students and the people who are most entrusted to us, the impact of that. And as we also witnessed our administration adopt a posture that was legalistic and protective of institutional reputation and not human and responsive to the trauma that was experienced, it continues to be very difficult for us. So I need to start here because partly that's where I am and I'm processing, so that's going to be part of what you hear here today from me. What I'm learning in the process is the importance of candor, the importance of vulnerability, the importance of speaking to one another in ways that are honest, and of the need for us in higher education to cultivate cultures of care when so much of what we do is reward behaviors that are toxic. So what I'll talk about today, this morning a little bit, what I'll talk about more in more detail this afternoon with respect to the humane metrics for the humanities and social science grant that we have, are some concrete ways that I'm hoping to embody and help us more broadly in the academy, in higher education, think about what do we value most, and how can we realign what we're doing with what we value. And we're working through that at MSU right now, so it's very, for me, I mean, even to the point of, I realize, having been at Penn State and not having been here at Baylor when all of that was unfolding here, but now being at MSU, I'm very cognizant of the difference between being inside of it and being outside of it. Because when you're outside of it, what the filter is through ESPN and through the national media, which doesn't give you any texture to the human dimension of it. And when you're inside of it, as you all know, the human texture is just heartbreaking on all levels. And when you think about the nobility of the work, and nobility probably isn't the right word, the importance, I hesitate about nobility because it's so fraught with structures of power that are unhealthy. The importance of the educational mission that we're undertaking. We have to realign. And so I begin with the thank you to this is the thank you. The rock was written with the thank you in teal, which is the color for and the ribbons for survivors of sexual abuse, and the names of the survivors were on the rock. And I mean, we're talking about over 263 survivors that are associated with the Michigan State University failure, and we need to talk about that, and we need to talk about, and we need to respond in human ways, and that really leads me to the broader point that I want to make around modes of digital communication, because the digital can pull us apart so easily. It fragments us. It can. It removes us from the face-to-face dynamic and engagement that is where we learn how to respond to the cues that are important to attend to as we learn how to speak with one another. But what I've sought to do, and continue to try to learn to do, is to use these modes of communication to try to nurture community around the work that I'm doing and the work that others are doing. So this, in case you're wondering, this little platform for presentation is a platform called Popboards. It's something that one of our alums at Michigan State developed, and I really like it because it allows you to go in non-linear ways, so that I can start talking about wherever I go. So I do have a story to tell you, which is related to that silly picture of me in the second slide. But since I mentioned the point about, I was about to touch the actual screen. That's not a touch screen. That would have been silly. Yeah, this is the one I want. So I think, yeah, this is the one. So many of you know about the Domain of One's Own initiative that Reclaim Hosting has, and this is the idea that faculty and students and staff members that you need to cultivate and nurture a domain of your own, and that by that I really mean a web domain, a space that is controlled by you as a person, whether you be a staff member, a faculty member, a student. And the importance of that lies in the fact that the business models of so many of these platforms are perverse. And what I mean by that is that, and as we're seeing it happen in Facebook, right, that you are the product, right, and the advertisement and your behaviors online and all of that is what is being leveraged to drive the financial and business model for many of these companies. And we don't even have access to or an understanding that the business requires them to be opaque about the algorithms that are driving it. Okay? So now more than ever, it is really important for us to have a space of our own. And what we've tried to do at Michigan State, and we were doing it at Penn State too, is provide a free web hosting space to all of our faculty and our students, particularly focusing on graduate students, to empower them to think about how are they appearing in public online. And to give them a space to both, the way I constantly, you can do it in the register of PR and communication, branding and all that, but that doesn't really resonate with faculty and students. Certainly, I'm the dean of the College of Arts and Letters, and then I got the artists and I got the humanists, so the idea of branding really doesn't get at what we're talking about, because what we're talking about is community building. And so having a domain of one's own is really important, because you need to know that, and the way we structure it is that students and faculty, when they leave, if they leave, they can take it with them. Namely, all that data and all that goes with them. They do have to then take over the payment of the cost for that, but it's not a huge amount. And what we work on is creating spaces where there's listening. So, everybody thinks, well, I need a space to broadcast my, what I'm doing in broadcasting. Well, there is a dimension of sharing, okay, for sure. And I do think there's all kinds of issues and questions around, what's too much, how much, and how do you, but thinking about your online scholarly presence and your online presence as involving listening, right? So think about how are you structuring your feeds, whether it be in Twitter or in Facebook or other kinds of feeds you're using, to listen more broadly and potentially more deeply to the work of your colleagues. And so listening always begin with that. And then amplifying. Amplifying the work of others. That is the key, one of the keys to community building. And it's rooted in attentive listening and discerning kind of what's worth amplifying and what's not. So now we're into all of these core liberal arts values of attentive listening, critical discernment, ethical imagination. What should be amplified? What should maybe be not so amplified? And this picture is a picture that I use for the Digital Dialogue podcast, and I will talk about that, although I will say in all candor that my administrative life has pulled me away from a lot of new episodes of the Digital Dialogue, sadly, and I put more energy in a podcast that we're doing in the college called the Liberal Arts Endeavor, where we're working with, we're having conversations with students and with other faculty members about what we're doing in the College of Arts and Letters. But what the vision for the Digital Dialogue podcast was is the same vision for the Liberal Arts Endeavor podcast is to amplify the work of others. So I was writing the book on Socratic and Platonic politics, and I was doing a lot of reading of my colleagues' work. And I thought, okay, let me invite them onto a podcast in which we would talk about their work. So amplify their work in this public way. And of course, you know, in the result of those conversations, my own kind of ongoing research in those areas was integrated into it. But it was about elevating them. This gets to the point I started with. We do not value and recognize the degree to which we elevate the work of our colleagues as a metric for our own success. Okay? So as a dean, I'm thinking, well, we need to build into our evaluation processes, our promotion and tenure processes, not just what have you done, but what have you empowered others to do? How have you helped that junior faculty member place a paper? How have you mentored someone in a way that helps them advance their career? We should be able to tell just as beautiful a story about that as we are about how many publications we have, how many books we've written. So the digital dialogue was an early attempt of mine to try to practice that in public. And I will tell you that just by virtue of putting a microphone in front of a colleague and asking them to talk about their work, just that action along with having read their text, that act of generosity has led to some of the most transformative and powerful conversations that I've had in my academic career, and I have actually probably could look at that. That's the page I should probably bring up for this, which is the page with all of the, as it loads, as it takes forever. It loads slower when people are watching, just for the record. All of these podcasts with faculty and with students and any time there was something that I was working on when I knew the person or knew that they might be willing to come on to this podcast, I would invite them. And you really, if you look at these 73 episodes, you can see probably the evolution of my own intellectual life, and certainly of that Socratic and Platonic political philosophy book, growing out of this. And in that book, which was published a couple of years ago, and that's a story of a failure, which I will talk about in a minute. It was published by Cambridge University Press, and it was designed in a certain way. I say it's a failure because it hasn't done what I wanted it to do, but it's a success in many other ways. These podcasts are embedded in the electronic version of the book, where those conversations were enriching the work and the chapters that happened. So the book itself references these podcasts, and you can listen to them when you're reading the book, and you click into it, and you can listen to the conversation that led to that. So it's that kind of focus on. And so maybe I'll tell the story about the failure here of the book. So this is the web page that I have for the book, and the book, the Socratic and Platonic political philosophy, practicing a politics of reading, it's called. And since Anne is here, I'm happy to be able to talk a little bit about Socrates and Plato for a minute. So I'll tell you a little bit about this book. So the book began with a question that we were working through with our undergraduate students about. On the one hand, Socrates says in the Apology, well, I never practiced politics. And if I had done so, I would have died a long time ago. And yet in the Gorgias, he says, I'm the only one who practiced the true art of politics. And so trying to figure out, how does this, what is the nature of Socratic politics? And as I unpacked that question, it began to be clear to me that Socrates' practice of politics was to transform the lives of those he spoke, with whom he spoke, orienting them toward justice and questions of beauty and truth and justice, and allowing those questions to shape their lives, which we don't. So this kind of politics is not the politics of running for office. It's the politics of human community and transformation of life. But what I also realized in the process was that there's something interesting going on different between what Socrates is doing dramatically within the dialogues and what Plato was doing with us as readers. So all of a sudden the question of why Socrates never wrote, but Plato did, why Socrates chose to engage in oral conversation and Plato adopted the new technology of writing in his work, and the affordances and limitations that came with that writing became a major theme of my book. And then it occurred to me that, well, it can't just be a theme of the book. I have to put this into practice in the very way in which the book is published. And so this goes to a core principle that I'm trying to operate with, and I'll talk more about also this afternoon, is the idea of performative consistency. Do your words match your actions? Does your theory, is it put into practice in the way in which your work is published, and the work is shared? Okay. So what I said, I was very excited about this. Kind of, okay, what has to happen is this book has to be itself a dialogue. Right? So we have to have these levels. You have Socrates talking dramatically talking with his interlocutors in the dialogue. Plato having this conversation with us as readers and transforming our lives. I mean, over generations, think about all the lives that have been transformed by the reading of Plato. And thank goodness Plato wrote, because that intergenerational transformation wouldn't have been possible because of the way in which language is preserved in writing. And now with the emergence of the digital age, some of the dynamic nature of the oral tradition that Socrates cared so much about and worried so much about in relationship to writing was now available to me as a scholar working on this book. So I taught at Cambridge and was very excited. Yeah, this is great. I said, okay, look, this is a digital project. This is a digital book, an enhanced digital book. I get that you're going to put it through the normal process of academic review and all of your traditional things, but don't think of it like just a book that is going to sit there. I want the reader to be able to listen to the podcast and to be able to comment on the text and make those comments public in a way that pings me so that I can respond to the engaged reader. So that the work of the book, the transformation of the life of the reader, would be something of the ongoing work that I was doing. Okay, there were the reason why it's a failure is so a couple things. One is they weren't capable of delivering that technology to me. And we got it, but it's so clunky. I mean, so this page has on it, comments from students and others with me responding. And these are comments from people who have read the book and worked on the book. I was able to go into Adriel Trott's undergraduate class. She taught a chapter of the book, and they were able to engage. I Zoomed in, I Skyped into them, and we talked about this, and so it was working in that sense. But the real vision of this was for a situation where somebody on their iPad or on their whatever device they have could highlight text, type a marginal comment, and if they wanted it to, they could keep it private, but also they could ping the author. The technology is there, but we weren't able to adapt it in the right way for this project. And also, I have a sneaking suspicion that readers aren't quite ready for that yet. Like, really, you're reading a book, do you really want to deal with the author? But at the moment that you're reading it, well, I mean, potentially yes, but potentially not at all, right? So, but the practices of reading can be transformed. which means that then if this worked in the way that I had originally visioned it, this book would be a living book that constantly evolving digitally after having been written, and it would evolve in conversation and through conversation with readers. And their world would be transformed, and my world would be transformed, and the community would emerge out of that. I mean, it also was not successful in the sense that I also then became a dean, and turned out that spending my life writing and rewriting that same book is not exactly in the cards for me at the moment. Although I am convinced that there's a way in which we could make it easier to do that kind of work so that it can be done done asynchronously and in an ongoing way. And that maybe gets me to a bigger point about how I try to do this work with respect to having an online presence in the midst of everything else. So this is kind of the little graphic that sort of shows the ecosystem of, and it's all starting with a domain of my own. So cplong.org is where, that's the canonical place. That's the place. If you want to find me, what I'm up to, what I'm all about, that's where you go. And we can look at that site a little bit more. It keeps, it's constantly evolving. And in the evolution, I'm thinking more intentionally about what does it mean to appear in public in this way. And I'm telling you, it has changed since I was here in 2012 as I was an associate dean and starting to try to learn what it meant to be an administrator in this space that's very hyper-public. And of course, what does it mean to be a father, and how to balance that, and how to, and recognize that now as a dean, everything you say is like dripping with significance for people. Even when you recognize, as I do about myself, that a lot of what I need to do is process things externally. I need to talk through issues. That becomes a challenge unless you alert people to, okay, we're talking through an issue. Because as soon as I start doing that, 2 days later I'm going to hear, well, the dean said X, Y, or Z. Well, I probably did, but we were thinking through an issue, So in any case, so here, this is how it's this kind of bidirectional feeding. Mostly, it's coming from it's posting something as a blog post that is starting on my own domain and then going out and being shared through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I still have the Flickr. icon. I don't use Flickr as much as I used to. So many people also don't. But and then the Buffer and Medium, and so these various modes are part of this. And the question is that they have to think about is, well, what are the affordances and limitations of each of these kinds of ways of sharing? But I have been very conscious of having the canonical place be cplong.org, which currently looks like this, and has just gone through a little bit of a redesign. I have, so that MSU is happy, I have the Michigan State branding on there, which I finally conceded to, and I'm not even going to get into it. But what you see here also is so the College of Arts and Letters, my digital vita. We can look at some of my grants and my publishing activities. But as you scroll down, you also see the ways in which, that's interesting. On this, because it could be because of the website that this, or the browser that this is using, that my tweets aren't coming up. But I was going to illustrate how also Twitter feeds into the site, which it does on a normal, when people aren't watching me present, it actually works. So it's a little bit like taking your car to the mechanic and then it's working perfectly. But the point being that those things, that work is reciprocal. That's, you know, and a lot of things that I'm doing on Twitter now will feed into the online presence here. So it goes both ways. So I'm hesitating now because I'm feeling like maybe I should open it up for questions and about, because I put a lot out there, and I would love to have more of a free-flowing conversation with people if you're okay with that, and then I can go to some of these other points if I need to. So let me just pause here for, are there some questions about what I've talked about so far?
Well,
Yeah.
You've moved from faculty to assistant or associate dean, now to full-time dean.
Yeah.
And is the deanship takes over the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
And just, you know, I mean, how's that felt? How does that work with your profession, with what you want to be?
Great. That's a important. I mean, I really appreciate that question because, you know, deans don't get asked, like, what do you want to be?
Yeah.
You know, and part of the answer is to empower faculty and students to answer that question in meaningful ways. And what I mean by that is all of this work is about creating a meaningful life. And the questions that the responsibilities that I now have as a dean involve creating the conditions under which my faculty and students and all of those who come in contact with the College of Arts and Letters can be more successful. So one of the things that we're doing in that exact regard is this slowly loading page on the MSU Domains. Oh, okay, it's not coming up there. Was it up there before? Okay, and this is our project where we have a fellows program for faculty and graduate students to create their own domain and to think meaningfully about how they're using that to do the work, to create the community around the work that they're trying to do. And we have good examples here. Oh, now I got, you know, tweets coming in, so you'll see that. Hopefully nobody will be too rude. And so these are some example pages. So for example, Yomira is a faculty member who is doing really interesting work, intersectional work around the Caribbean and Africa and around boundaries and borders and so she, you know, we're empowering her to think out loud and curate her work in ways that will make her more successful. So she's on a Florida Foundation Fellowship right now, having had to turn a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship down because you can't hold both at the same time. And so this is the kind of amazing faculty member that she is. But she's thinking intentionally about how she's using the space to create work around the work that she's doing, and then of course the work that I'm trying to help her do. The Women of Color initiative that emerged out of her work. So now my job is to nurture her success, because diversity, equity, and inclusion is a core priority of my life and my leadership as a dean. And so when you ask me about my pathway, so my pathway of the way we talk about that with our faculty is, what is your pathway to intellectual leadership? We talk about that with our staff, and we talk about that with our graduate students, our undergraduates. What is your pathway? What's the arc of your career going to look like, and how can we put things in place to help you get there? And with Yomira, for example, when I have that conversation with her, and she's a pre-tenure faculty member doing intersectional work that is very so there's no there's no, well, what's the top ranked journal in your field? Well, wait a minute, I'm creating the field here. Okay? So there's no top, so that means that's got to look different. And the metric for success for that has to look different. That involves a conversation about what does that look like. And there's a lot of hard work that is invisible associated with that. We got to make it visible. So part of this is that. So talking to her about, okay, we got your domain. Let's get this stuff out there, right? And believe me, when she tweets about it, I'm retweeting, and the college page is retweeting, and we're helping. And I'm mentioning somebody who over here, somebody who I maybe met at Baylor, who's doing similar work, and I'm trying to connect them on Twitter. I have a colleague, Ron Hendrick, in the College of Ag and Natural Resources. He's also on Twitter. So we've got this big, if you look at the hashtag Spartan Deans, you'll see the way in which we're nurturing our own connection across colleges using the hashtag. And, taking pictures at each other's events and celebrating them and mentioning them and amplifying. So now I'm trying to amplify the College of Arts, the College of Ag and Natural Resources work. That's led to our collaboration on a food initiative that across colleges and in conjunction with Dean Prabhu David from the College of Com Arts and Sciences, who also is on Twitter. And so you'll see that Spartan Deans hashtag is populated by that kind of amplification. It's the community building around the educational mission that is what I'm. If you are asking me about the pathway to intellectual leadership for me, it is rooted in the transformative power of education and the desire to put the weight of my life on enhancing that, so that we can, through education, learn how to be better with one another, learn how to have more candid conversations, more just relationships. Yeah, it goes back to truth, beauty, and justice. Yeah, go ahead.
Plato usually didn't put himself in his writings, except for a couple of exceptions. And
Yeah.
Also I have a colleague here in religion who works on Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard used pseudonyms. So I guess I'm just interested, how much you've kind of reflected on that issue of self-disclosure in the public realm. Or like,
Yeah.
why don't you have a pseudonym? Or why aren't you practicing platonic anonymity?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Thank you. The short answer for that is accountability. I think there is an enormous amount of value in having your person associated with your words. As I began with the idea of performative consistency, the idea that you need to perform the words that you speak. Your life needs to embody the values that are embedded in the things you say. That becomes problematic when you divorce yourself from the words. Now, okay, having said that, before all the Kierkegaardians get upset at me for, and maybe the Platonists, although we could agree to distinguish between Platonism and Plato. So I just had to give that one to you. I recognize that I am standing here before you in a very, very privileged position. I'm a cisgendered, white, male, tenured professor, dean. So and plus other things too, which give me privilege, I'm sure, that I'm blind to, but are there. So that, I mean, it's a privilege for me to be able to be out, like I'm out there, you know, and I'm talking about my kids. And I'm not, most of the time, I'm not getting ripped apart by trolls, you know. But that's not true of people, of a lot of people. And so the lesson here is to be, you need to figure out where you are, how you are going to be in it. So, and I maybe should qualify all of this. I'm giving you these examples as this is kind of, this is not, doesn't have that normative, well, you must do this, right? There's real reasons not to be online at all. There's real reasons to be online in a different kind of way. There are real reasons to protect yourself with pseudonyms. There are real reasons to do, right? The question is, what are you trying to do with your work? And that has to drive it. I mean, it's like learning objectives in teaching. Right? What's your learning? Let's get the design fitting to that. Yeah, go ahead.
I work in the graduate school with our graduate students, and I'm beginning to work with our online faculty at Baylor. And you may have heard our graduate programs in particular are just skyrocketing with students and new faculty teaching online. And so I think what you're saying is so important. My question is a how question, and I think it's for everybody in the room, my Baylor colleagues as well. What I think for our graduate students, they're already used to growing up in a digital age that thinks about how they look online. So my daughter, for example, who's 24, is very aware of her online presence. But it's not related to her academic self. It's related to, am I looking cool?
Right.
And do I have the right friends in my
Right.
head? And so that idea for that generation of an online presence and how you cultivate that, I think is very present. What we can offer is alternatives to looking cool. And
Yeah.
I love what you're saying about we have to support others and empower others. So I love the question of not just how am I cultivating my academic self, but how am I helping others along the way by amplifying. So I love that concept. For our new online faculty, many of them did not grow up with a Facebook self.
Right.
So now they're teaching online, and it's so important because their relationship to their students, yes, it's in the Canvas boundary, but it's also out there, and helping them think about their academic presence as now online faculty where they can be found outside their Canvas boundaries. So two very different groups. I'm
Yeah.
stereotyping broadly here, of course.
Sure, right.
But so I think for us at Baylor, the question is, how do we start? Is it through, you know, workshops on, and we have done some of that, creating your online or entering the digital community. Is it? I don't know how to get started.
Yeah. So I think I'll give you a couple of examples how we've started. So one is that the faculty fellows around online scholarly presence. We have graduate students in that too. We've provided graduate students with a domain of their own so that they can have it. But what we've realized, and where we're doing something different than a lot of places, and because a lot of the universities who have domain of one's own are focusing on teaching, using it for teaching, which is important. But our focus has been on faculty development around online scholarly presence. And the reason for that is my belief that, you know, this is the CV now. This is going to, I mean, so when everybody said, well, I have to do all this now, and in addition to everything else I'm doing, the point that has to be made is that, no, this is the work. Namely, not necessarily the designing of the website and maintaining of it, but the making your work, sharing your work publicly, and nurturing community around it, and doing that in an intentional way. And we need to help our students learn how to do that, just as we need to help them learn how to teach. So a kind of fellows program where you give you know, where they can put it on their CV, their digital CV too. And I always say, you know, no scholarly activity without a digital signature, which is actually why this whole story. So this picture, which, okay, I look a little maniacal. I can't believe I keep bringing this thing up, but this picture was taken in like 2011, and I was given a presentation at the University of Michigan. I was still at Penn State. It was my first digital humanities presentation, and I was given a presentation, and I had committed myself that I wasn't going to do anything that didn't have a digital signature to it because I was trying to curate my online space. So of course I had a camera, and I'm like, so then I needed a picture of myself presenting, but that's kind of weird to do, like a selfie of yourself presenting, right? So I asked this person to take it back, explain that. I asked the person to take a picture, and he took the picture. Well, it turns out the person who I asked, his name is Dean Rayberger, who is at Michigan State, runs the digital humanities and social science at Michigan State, and of course became a good friend of mine, where we partnered on creating the Public Philosophy Journal together with Matrix. And then strangely, somehow he showed up on the search committee for the dean that was open at Michigan State. So, you know, I mean, I don't know how much of my life can be transferred to this picture, but the point being, I only met Dean because I was kind of out there and said, would you know, I knew nobody at the conference. Like, could you take my picture? So, and then we laughed about it, and so, you know, that story is just to illustrate the idea that, you know, these things that are digital are human. So and my relationship with Dean and with all the people that I've met through that connection we made, which we wouldn't have otherwise made, or maybe we would have, but in a different way. It is nurtured by an intentional curation of your scholarly life. How are you doing that? And having, you know, just as we ask, you know, graduate students to think about, okay, well, what's your area of specialization and how are you going to get there? Right? We need to have them thinking about that. Yeah, in the back. Yeah.
Well, bemoaning the banality of what passes as post-worthy life on social media.
Yeah.
I once heard Thomas Hibbs say, the unlived life is not worth examining. In other words, if you're not, you know, why do I care what you're eating for lunch, posting your picture? Go live your life, then I'll look at your life.
Yeah.
You know, flipping the philosophical statement. So how do you prevent, or how do you guard against this kind of thing devolving into electronic vanity?
Yeah. That's an important concern. And that's why I emphasize the habits of listening and amplification and not broadcasting. I mean, you know, when I post something on my blog with respect to, you know, what, like when I get back from being here, I'll take the digital artifacts that we will have created, and I'll put them in a blog post. But that's, for me, that's the kind of curatorial archiving, you know, the just sort of, it's like updating my CV, and it's also for me to be able, when somebody asks me, well, what did you say there, or how did you go, right, then I can, boom, send them right to that. And this gets to it, maybe, this slide. So what I've tried to do as dean is to, no, this is me trying to pretend to be, you know, all black and white pictures. So there's the vanity right there. Okay, so okay, now I'm proving your point about it. So you know, there is. We get to own it. You know, there is a sense of, you know, you're curating your space. You want to appear well in public. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, unless you're lying. You know, I mean, and so. But the reason why I pull this up is because what I'm trying to do in this effort to write along the way is a kind of public journaling as a dean, and being able to deal with some of the things that I said before, namely I need to externalize my thought, and I never realized that how much being a dean is about writing. because that's how I process what matters. I need to put it, I need to craft it and write. And so trying to figure out a way to do that so that my colleagues and my, and faculty members and students can see that. And the key there, though, I don't know if I can find it quickly, but there's a key point here where I said, well, so to begin, let's agree, if you read it here, it's not finished. I mean, this is a problem with this Platonic problem of writing, right? And so, but I want to try to practice that. And so I think part of what I'm trying to get back to the real question, which is, how are you actually living authentically online? So it's not just, it's the selfie with every hair follicle, or the lack thereof in my case, in place. It's, there is some messiness. And this is the thing that's really hard with graduate students. And it's also hard because our faculty sometimes put more pressure on graduate students to be perfect too early. Namely, to only publish something when it's perfect. No, you can write a blog post that talks about your process. And that, as I say, with some trepidation, I'm writing this with trepidation. Own that, right? This is not finished. If you're thinking about looking at my canonical work and you're going to judge me for this job you're looking at, and you read this and you see there's some immaturity to it, that's because I wrote it, 10 years ago. I'm different now. If we can't see that, if we can't, as employers, as higher education, we are institutions of learning. We should be able to be unsure. We should be able to be rough around the edges a little bit, unpolished for some time. Yes, when you get the book published, that's what the review process is, that's what the editing process is all about. That takes a huge number of people to help. Right? The journal article, which is why those things become, on a generous view, that's why those things become the markers of scholarly quality. But this work, the vulnerability, the openness, the hesitancy, and the exposure of that is really important to share as we learn to be scholars. A scholar is somebody who's pushing the boundaries of what we know. That's going to come with some pretty serious failures of understanding. Yeah.
Thanks. I completely agree with you. Except for, do you also imagine that the folks above you in administration agree with that definition of what we're doing here? And do you ever get pushback in the sense that that can be really threatening for an institution who has a reputation to uphold, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes. Okay, so let's talk. I don't know how much time we have, but so you're getting to the core of an issue. And then I've heard talked a little bit about the aspirations to R1 status that are happening here at Baylor, and in Michigan State it parses out, and we need to make sure we're still in the AAU and we have our research mission. There's numbers. We need to be very careful of the way in which those aspirations pervert our values. So on the one hand, I would say with respect to, at Penn State, that calcification of those, what I would say was this sort of very traditional ways of thinking about research, teaching, and service, it was pretty calcified. And intentionally driven there by a dean who I very much respect, who has elevated the reputational value of that college because of that. And so as I come into Michigan State, where there's this pressure about the AAU and this grant writing and all these things, and I got that training, administrative training, so this is kind of what I know. But I'm also feeling something in myself that's saying, is there the best work, Yomira's work. Like all of the faculty members who I intentionally went out to meet, to support, because I put diversity, equity, and inclusion at the very center of my own expectation of myself for success. I began to realize that the most innovative scholars in our college think of research, teaching, and service as intertwined in a way that the traditional way of thinking about that just doesn't. So I realized that we need to, and I'm going to talk more about this afternoon around the humanities metrics grant, that we need to have a kind of professional development oriented RPT process where we ask the question about what is your path to intellectual leadership, and how can we ensure that tenure is just something you get along that path. Okay? Because so many of my junior colleagues are saying, when I ask them about their work, they're saying, well, I'm doing this book now, but really, this is the thing I care most about, and I'm going to wait till I get tenure to do it. And I'm dying inside when I hear that. That can't be the answer. We need to have the most innovative, interesting work, the work that blurs the boundary between teaching, service, and research at the heart of what we're doing. And we need the infrastructure to support that. And it's going to look different for different people. So that means it's going to be hard to have a standard for each thing. What I'm finding, though, is that at the upper reaches of the administration at MSU, and I think it's also true as at Penn State, was that because they're dealing with such a range of disciplines, from the fine arts to the very hard sciences, with the humanities and social sciences in between, there's a lot more flexibility about what counts as good research, where we're actually looking and depending much more on the disciplinary homes or cross-disciplinary homes at the departmental or cross-departmental levels and the external review letters. So it really turns out to be the harder work of convincing your most immediate colleagues that this is excellent, and putting the right language to that so that they see that. It's not excellent in the sense that this journal had this index on it, and right, but it is excellence because here's my goal: to transform lives in certain kinds of ways. I mean, the mission of Michigan State University is advancing knowledge and transforming lives. It's so simple. And yet we lose sight of it so easily because we are caught up in searching for reputational equity that doesn't have anything to do, it doesn't have much to do with impact in the world, making the world a better place. Oh, my article was published in this top-tier journal. Oh, how many people actually read it? Maybe 3. No, okay, that's maybe low. But 15, 20, 50. Okay. I did this work with the community in Lansing, Michigan. A faculty member doing amazing work in the school district there, where we're empowering traditionally underrepresented students to see their own language in a different light, and their own ways of thinking in a different light, and that's opening up whole new possibilities for whole communities of people. And we need to be able to say, well, that's impact. That's scholarly impact. Right? And it's not just outreach. Right? Because it's infused with the work, it's infused with the scholarly apparatus and the scholarly work that this colleague is doing, and it's infused into our teaching. It doesn't even make sense to talk about 3 legs of a stool. It's all intertwined. So we have to get to that place. So getting there is going to be not pretty. Okay, 5 minutes. All right, so yeah.
I have a really practical question. So with all your work, especially with your faculty and your graduate students, what happens when somebody moves? Because you said you provide physical space.
Yeah.
And maybe this has also like your branding.
Yeah.
And your MSU branding, and you said it's cplong.org. It's not cplong at msu.edu.
Right. Yeah, so great.
And so as we work with students, how do we help them navigate?
So that's important. So, and it's probably, the answer probably does differ between undergraduate, graduate, student, faculty. let's start with graduate students for a second. So the way the domain of one's own worked, we contracted with Reclaim Hosting. It's not a Michigan State-owned service. It's an external service that anybody can join to get hosting. But what we did was we contracted with them to pay for, at the start, 500 licenses. And we just gave them out we give them out to anybody who wants to participate in it. And then we train them on how to do it. When they leave, we stop paying for that, but they can keep it.
Is this hundreds of dollars a year? Or?
No. The domain registration is, it's very cheap. It's a couple bucks a year. The cplong.org is a couple bucks a year. But then the hosting is, I don't know. That's a good question exactly how much it is, but I think it's less than $100 a year. And but then, of course, if it's a graduate student, we want them to leave, right? We want them to leave. So they might have some institutional branding to get credibility for themselves as a graduate student. But when they go somewhere else, hopefully they'll have an institution that will either cover that for them, or they'll be employed in such a way that they actually could pay for that. Right? Placement is an important goal for our graduate programs. So with graduate students, it's that. Now with faculty, it's interesting. So I was joking about the branding that I finally acquiesced to being put on my site, because when I came in, I had a very long conversation, good conversation with our communication and brand strategy university level group. And I said, look, you're going to get nowhere with the faculty if you lead with it has to be MSU branded. The faculty are not, faculty are, they have loyalties to institutions, but they're not, their loyalty is to their work. So there's some issues that we can probably talk about. I don't even want to get into that. But so having a model that allows that allows them to take that work with them if they leave, in a weird way, is a strategy for keeping them. Does that make sense? So sort of if you love them, set them free kind of thing, right? So you say, look, yes, we want you to nurture that online presence for you, for your work, for the work you care most about, and your colleagues' work. We have templates for it, very easy, put the MSU brand on it. If you want the easiest way to get a really sweet looking website quickly, it's got the brand on there and it's got the functionality that we've worked through with people. If you don't want that, that's fine, that's no problem too, you don't have to have it on there. With undergraduates, I think it's less of a branding issue, it's more of, we put in place infrastructure for them to do blogging and stuff like that, and that's because that's really our infrastructure for them. Then it becomes kind of an MSU thing that stays with us, or if they want to do a domain of their own, then they can do that too. Then they don't have to brand it with MSU. We had this whole conversation in the Fellows Program around what are the affordances and limitations of branding yourself, or branding of putting the MSU, the institutional logo on your page, right? You get a ton of credit about it. Now they know, they come to your page, and this isn't just somebody who launched a page. They're somebody who an institution has said is got credentials enough to be either a graduate student there, an undergraduate, a faculty member. So that's in value. I think I don't need to talk to us here at Baylor or at MSU or at Penn State about the ways in which that cuts both ways. When the institution begins to act in ways that are inconsistent with its own values. So then, you see it, mine's still on there. It's still on there because I am putting my weight on the side of trying to nurture a more humane and human Michigan State University. And if I distance myself from that, then I distance my humanity from that, and I gotta stay there. I gotta stay in that right now. Because we need one another. We need one another really to be together here in this moment. But it does play itself out in online spaces. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.